evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the Step Up, Make a Difference podcast. I'm Mike Peacock, your co-host, along with Dr. Marty Durden, and we are coming to you once again. And Marty, we got a great guest this week. Everybody's going to be in for a treat watching this podcast today, as we've got a gentleman from Phoenix City, Alabama, but he's well known literally all over the place, and that is Kelvin is joining us this afternoon. And Kelvin, there you are. Welcome to the Step Up podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're honored that you're here, Kelvin. You are highly respected in the servant leadership world, and you bring so much to the table, man. We're just happy to have you here on the show. So thank you very much for being our guest.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I'm glad to be here.
I'm gonna echo that a little bit, Kelvin, because in all my years, I think I had a total of about 12 or 13 years in education, and a lot of those I went through those, the in-service meetings at the beginning of the year, and some of those were interesting, and some of them were not so interesting. But yours was the absolute champion of all my years of going through a teacher in service. The emergenetics in service that you did at Calvary when I was there was the absolute top of the heap as far as those go. One that I just had the best time doing that, and it was the most meaningful all the way around, and I really enjoyed it.
Wow. Well, I appreciate that. I'm almost speechless, and that's hard for me to be. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was really good stuff. We enjoyed it. But before we get going here, let's kind of back up and talk about your background a little bit before we talk about the more modern, pressing, relevant things. Let's talk about your background a little bit and your growing up and your connections to athletics and your connections to servant leadership and all of that, and how that all got started.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Phoenix City. My mom, I had two great parents. My father passed away a couple of years ago, but my mom's still living. And I reflect on growing up here in Phoenix City, small town, and my father was the school's chemistry and physics teacher at Central High School. He was also our school's head basketball coach. He was also one of the first 3 Black teachers at Central High School. Wow. And I learned a lot from him growing up, just sitting at his knees, watching basketball, watching sports in general, and just learning a great deal. It's funny because we talked X's and O's a lot, my father and I, even, up until months before he passed, we talked X's and O's, but being around him and observing, just watching how he interacted with the players. Now he had a little Bobby Knight and John Thompson in him, so, but how he interacted with them. And, but when he wasn't around them, I would watch the players, and I wanted to see how they interacted with each other. What was the assistant coach's role and all of that? How did he interact when my father wasn't there, and that kind of thing. And I learned a lot about that as well. And so growing up in Phoenix City, I was always around athletics. Here's something I find really interesting. Coach Wayne Trawick, when he was the head football coach at Central, when I was little, my sister and I, we rode on the bus with the football team, because my dad, he was a statistician. So we rode on the bus with the football team to several games. And so I was always around that environment. And I graduated from Central. And once I graduated from Central, I started college. I went to Auburn and graduated there, and now I'm an observer. I'm an interested observer. I'm one of those who yells at the screen a lot, or if I'm in person, I'm always yelling at the referees.
There you go. I understand. But yeah, your dad was a legendary status basketball coach at Central, and had a lot of great teams and a lot of great athletes come through there. And also Wayne Trawick. I mean, what else can you say about Wayne Trawick? I mean, it's mostly already been said. He was tremendous and built a huge program over there, and his legacy is still, the blood of his legacy is still running through the veins of that school and that athletic program now, as is your dad's with the basketball. just a tremendous athletic department, athletic program over there that has a long, long history of success.
It
Yeah.
certainly was. I
During
think that,
Coach, go ahead. I'm sorry, Marty. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I was going to say about Coach Red is, in my memories of him, he had a certain dignity and grace about his carriage, the way people, when you saw your dad, you automatically respected him. And he did have a fire, like all coaches do, that burns. And you have to have that in our profession. But he's remembered, I think, as an educator by a lot of people just as much as his coaching prowess.
I agree with you. When he passed away, one of the things I thought was really interesting is the number of students that came by the house, the number of students that came to the repast, the number of students came to the funeral. I was blown away by the students that he taught. Not necessarily the basketball players, because he did talk to them, quite often. But when I saw the students in mass, I was just like blown away by that.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. And if he taught chemistry and physics, then he was a very intelligent man. And if he was able to get high school students to learn and enjoy chemistry and physics, he was a special educator. Let me tell you, because that was those two subjects were my nemesis. Even though I ended up teaching a lot of physical science during my teaching days, physics and chemistry were not the most fun for me. I was a biological guy, and so if he could get a student to buy in and enjoy those, he was a special educator for sure.
Yeah, he taught it. He taught it so elementary too. That's the thing. He would always say that the more complex a problem is, same way with the play, you have to make sure it's so easy. You got to break it down so easy that people understand it. That kind of thing. And give you an example. He ran a fast break style of offense. But I asked him one time, I said, why do you do that? And he said he used to go down to the Spencer Recreation Center in Phoenix City, down in South Phoenix City. And he said the kids were running up and down the floor a lot, up and down the court. And he said, well, why would I bring them into the gym and confuse them with a lot of plays?
That makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
And that was his whole mindset right there. Just keep it as simple as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And
it obviously worked.
It's brilliant, actually. That's the best way to coach.
Yeah.
What's the old saying is, don't mess them up by coaching them. Let them play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let them do what they're good at. Find out what they're good at and do that. That's what you do.
Exactly.
But you've gone on and you are a part of a phenomenon called emergenetics.
Yes.
And I want you to tell us about emergenetics and what it is and where it came from and explain to people what it is, most of what you do now. What do you do now with emergenetics?
Well, first of all, let's just say this. Mr. Bill Turner, who I always call the father of the Synovus family of companies, he would always say that self-awareness was the most important characteristic of a servant leader. Like, a person cannot be an effective leader if he doesn't know who he or she is. And so Dr. Gail Browning founded Emergenetics. Emergenetics International is located just outside of Denver, Colorado. And so Gail would present Emergenetics, the meeting of the minds, to Leadership Georgia. So whenever I'm traveling in Georgia, periodically people will ask me, do you know Gail Browning? Of course I know Gail Browning. Well, Gail Browning and Mr. Bill Turner were like this, because he just fell in love with her when she taught him Emergenetics the first time and when he heard her present it. And Mr. Turner would always say he felt weird until he went through Emergenetics. And so you got the servant leadership piece where you talk about servant leadership, but you got to talk about self-awareness. There's all this talk these days about leadership, but rarely do you hear anyone talk about self-awareness. And the two are inexplicably linked. You can't have one without the other. So that's where Emergenetics comes in. And so when we do Emergenetics, I like to do it first because I think it really helps people understand how they like to think and how they like to behave, but also understanding the people in your sphere of influence, your manager, your supervisor, the president of your organization. Like, why do they say certain things? Why do they behave certain ways? And if you understand that, you're less likely you're less likely to take things so personal. You know, we live in a society right now. It's so hypersensitive. Like everybody's on edge. I shouldn't say everybody. I don't like to use a mass term like that. But there are a lot of people on edge, you know. But if you understand why your supervisor behaves and thinks the way that they do, that's going to make both of your jobs a lot easier. And so that's why when it comes to emergenetics, I take it so seriously. I can't turn it off. I literally, whether I'm in the grocery store and I see the clerk behind the counter, I can pretty much look at him or her and tell, you know, how they like to think and how they like to be. I can also tell it from a sports standpoint. Like when I'm watching games on television, I can literally look at a coach. I may not tell you what play he or she is going to call, but I can tell you the level of intensity in which they're going to call it. Mm-hmm. And at what point in the ball game. My biggest challenge, and I really stopped trying, my biggest challenge was trying to get the athletic world to understand emergenetics, but that's been a hard thing. that is extremely hard to get coaches, and that there's a reason why. You know, Nick Saban used to use a personality assessment, and I mean, what better role model to take than after, you know, Coach Saban? Well, why would he use a personality assessment? Because it makes his job that much easier. Because athletics and wins goes far beyond X's and O's.
Totally. I totally agree with that. We use the phrase more than winning all the time. And,
yes, I love it. I love it. Yes.
Well, that's
fascinating. We had Tim Fanning on a couple of weeks ago, Kelvin, and he told me, you know, during that conversation, he said, he said our priorities. He said winning, of course, is important. He said, but it's about 6th or 7th on the list of our priorities. And, you know, to hear a head coach that has been as successful and who has won as much as him say that winning was not up there at 1, 2, or 3, that it was on down toward the middle of the list a little bit. That was just, you know, a deer in the headlights moment for me. I was like, wow, that is so good to hear. You know, because so many people are like win, and there's a process that has to be in place before the winning. Because if you win up front, then what's going to happen when you lose? You know, what's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen when you stop having that success? Right. And it's you got to have a process in place to handle all of it.
I agree. Bill Walsh wrote a book called "The Score Takes Care of Itself," and that's the premise behind, you know, winning coming down to that 6th or 7th mark. But yeah, Tim Fanning's an outstanding human being. Forget the coach part. He's an outstanding human being.
No doubt.
He certainly is. You know, my model, my example that I always tried to coach and follow was John Wooden. And of course, his players will all say to a man that they never heard him utter the word win or lose. He completely stayed in the process. He didn't use the phrase stay in the process. Now, Saban's take is that's what we do. We stay in the process. We don't worry about outcomes, which is essentially the same thing, just a different way of expressing it.
Exactly.
So if you want to win, don't emphasize winning. That's the irony of being successful in sports.
And Kelvin, I don't know if you can do this with emergenetics or not, but if you can nutshell, you know, what goes on when you teach, when you guide somebody through emergenetics and the process, what is it that you're doing in that process?
Well, first of all, what we're trying to do is to get them to understand the neuroscience behind it, and that it's based on the latest neuroscience. That's first and foremost, because, you know, when I meet with prospective clients, I'll hear some say, well, isn't that like Myers-Briggs? Isn't that like this, that kind of thing? Well, they're all different, and you got to know what you're looking for. And that's the most important thing. They're not all the same. And so when it comes, we always start with the behaviors, because, and there are 3 behaviors. There's expressiveness. That's when you're talking basically introversion and extroversion. And then you have the assertiveness, and you have different ends of the spectrum. You've got some people who are controlling and directing, and there's nothing wrong with that. You need those individuals on your team. And then you have some people who are more peacekeeping. You know, they prefer, you know, it's not that they don't like conflict. They just prefer not to. And then you have the flexibility part. And those are people who, one end of the spectrum, they like options. You take them to a restaurant, they got to see the full menu before they order. You might be sitting there for 10 or 15 minutes before they order, but that's how they're wired. And then on the other end, you have people who are more tried and true. It's not that they don't like change, but they don't like change imposed upon them. And you have to understand it. Here's the deal. When it comes to behaviors, we see behaviors before we see thinking. So if you're going to have conflict in the classroom, in the family, in the church, Little League ball fields, you're going to see it behaviorally before you see it from a thinking standpoint. If I'm in a room, I have no idea what you're thinking, none whatsoever. But if I observe you long enough, I can tell a tremendous amount about how you behave. And that's the first thing we talk about. And then we get into the thinking part, because that's the part everybody likes, to talk about, because of the colors of blue, green, red, and yellow. And I know when I did it at Calvary, you wore your different colored shirts. And when I presented it at Aflac, wow, years ago, 150 managers and supervisors, they come into the Columbus Convention Trade Center, and it's blue, green, red, and yellow, that kind of thing. We have fun with that. But the interesting thing about that, when you put people in their different quadrants or parts of the brain, they start looking around the room, that aha moments. Now I see why Mike is over there and Marty is standing over in that particular part of the brain. Now I get it, and so that's basically what we're trying to get people to really understand themselves and get them to understand why they like to think and why they like to behave the way that they do.
Right. And it was a ton of fun to do that, see when we broke up into groups.
Yeah.
And you looked around that room, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
I kind of understand a little bit now, about these other people I've been wondering what was going on, and you sort of get you get that understanding. And I'm looking here at mine. I ended up with social and conceptual were my two biggest areas. Marty, I don't know whether you remember what you were when we did that or not, but
I'm green and blue.
You're green and blue, so you're
yin and yang. This is good. You both
structural and analytical. Yeah. And so and I was the least in the structural. And that
let's just say this. We're not going to say you were the least. We're just going to say you just didn't put a lot of energy into it.
There you go. I had the least energy for that. Yeah,
you could if you had to, and you did every day. When that bell rang, you were always on time.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Kelvin, I've always wanted to know this. What were your colors?
I'll let you guess.
Green is probably number one.
It's up there. Yeah. I'm
blue
a
is probably
process-oriented person. But I'm also very social too. And this is when it used to get me in trouble. The process part of me is just, okay, I'm going to work from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And then at 4 to 5, I'm going to wind down and just get things settled. Well, when I was working at the Pastoral Institute from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, I'm going to be focused. Well, it's on a Friday. It's football season. I'm just going to walk down the hall and talk to one of my coworkers a little bit. And I think I'll go there about 3:30. Well, 3:30 turns into 4:30. I'm so social. I want to, it's like, I'm having a good time, and they fight with one another from time to time. The structural part of me says, you got to be there at such and such a time. But the social part of me is like, but I'm having so much fun.
Yes. Yeah. And
that's amazing.
Social is my biggest group, so I would tend to get myself in a little bit of trouble for being a little bit overly social sometimes.
The only time my social gets me in trouble tremendously is at a sporting event with the referees. Other than that, I pretty much keep it in check.
It got me in trouble as a coach too. Same way.
Yeah.
I had quite a few little conflicts with referees and umpires. I'm not going to lie.
Me and my introverted self sitting there watching the game, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, are you kidding me?
Kelvin, I tell my wife that if when the doctor finally says to her, Marty's running out of time, he's got 1 day to live, I tell her to go get a referee in uniform, bring him in the room. I think I could get up one more time.
There you go. I love it. I love it.
But let's bring you in the servant leadership part, and you mentioned Mr. Turner, and He's written a fantastic book on servant leadership, and
Mhm.
bring the servant leadership aspect in. And Marty and I have been with Marty's curriculum that he's done on servant leadership and coaching, and the book that he's written. We've been trying to have guests on that fit different areas of that servant leadership model as a coach or as an
Mhm.
athlete, and so bring that in to this realm with us here and talk about the servant leadership aspect.
Well, here's the basis of it. I really, let me put it like this. I think God gives every one of us a talent, each one of us, and He wants
Mhm.
us to use that talent. Well, where do we spend most of our time? At work, right? And if you're a coach,
Yep.
you're spending more than 8 hours. Like you're there 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. You're getting
Yes.
phone calls at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. For many kids, you're the father figure. You're the uncle. You're the cousin. You're everything. And so with that, in order for you to be able to do your job as a coach and to shine a light on the young people that you have been privileged to coach, privileged to serve, then it's important that your leadership trusts you and treats you well so that you can do your job. No micromanaging, no berating, none of those kinds of things, no backstabbing. Let's create a culture where everybody can flourish, and we're not talking about happiness. I had a college president to tell me one time, and she is remarkable. She has an outstanding, outstanding institution. She says, Kelvin, my job is not to make my employees happy. My job is to create a culture so that they can flourish. Happiness comes from within. Happiness, that's your job. And really, I'd rather have peace of mind than so much happiness. You follow me? That
Yeah,
to me, that's the most
absolutely.
important part. So
Yeah.
that's servant leadership in a nutshell. That's creating a culture so that people that you've been entrusted to serve can flourish. That is what it's all about. And I'll point out something that I was talking to Marty about last week. I think this is a good time to talk about this.
I was hoping you'd bring this up.
Well, I was you probably
This is a reminder.
here's my Alexa. My Alexa is talking in the background, so you're gonna have to cut this part out. Alexa,
Oh, that's
stop.
okay.
Anyway, I was giving a presentation in Dallas a couple of years ago, and it was a servant leadership conference. And the gentleman ahead of me was a professor. And as he had about 2 or 3 minutes left, and he said, I'm beginning to believe that servant leadership is a cult. Now, this gentleman's written books on servant leadership, very knowledgeable. He said, it's either a cult or a club or both. And when he walked off the stage, and he was very engaging, everybody loved him. When he walked off the stage, he looked at me, he goes, it's a cult, right? It's a club. And I've often thought about that to the point I'm going to do I got a new video series coming out on YouTube, and I'm going to ask that question because servant leadership should be something that's all inclusive, like everybody's involved, as opposed to, well, Marty, you can be a part of the club, but Mike, you can't, and that kind of thing. And so it really has to start right there. And as Marty and I were talking the other day, the way it's preached is one thing, how it's practiced is another. There needs to be some synergy there. There needs to be some synergy. So I just want to make sure that when we talk about it, that we're talking about it in the vein that we're actually serving people and we're serving all people.
Kelvin, I think you really found the crux of the issue right there with that statement. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's largely misunderstood.
I agree with you.
And people unwittingly, with the right motives, are practicing servant leadership in their perspective. Mm-hmm. But that's really not. They just get one slice of the philosophy, not the entire thing. Mm-hmm. I believe that.
And one of the reasons I could say that, I bring I'm asking the question. That's all I'm doing. I'm asking the question. I want some dialogue around it. Now, if Mr. Bill Turner was around, I would love to have had this discussion with him because I added an 11th characteristic of a servant leader because I didn't see Greenleaf. Greenleaf didn't have it in his, and I didn't see Mr. Turner with his. And I started thinking, I said, we need to add the word courage. because you can preach servant leadership till you're blue in the face. But if you're in a position of leadership, there's going to come a time when you're going to have to step out front and you're going to be charged with taking the lead. And even though you're scared, you got to do it.
I agree with you. And I think that when I wrote my book, and I'm writing the second one, I call that one of the traits. I distinguish sort of I call what you just mentioned, the 10 green leaf, I call them characteristics. Traits are courage. That's one of
I love that
traits to you. And I think that you have to have that as leaders in our society today. One of the things I believe that's missing in a lot of leadership is courage, is unafraid to believe a set of, a philosophy, a set of beliefs, and practice them in your life. And I think sometimes we dodge, some of the things that servant leadership is about. One of the things I remember in a talk with Mr. Turner was the faith-based aspect of servant leadership. He told me one time that the Royal Bank of Scotland, or in BC, you smiling because you probably heard the story before.
Go for it.
They adopted the servant leadership curriculum, or style. They wanted to build a culture. And then somehow he read a book about Mr. Turner, about his Christian beliefs. So he called him back about to reject it because he thought, is this in a secular business world? Is this something that we can't do? Will it be too controversial, and will we end up losing customers, and will we take a hit in our business culture? And did you ever talk to him about that?
We had, matter of fact, we used to have those conversations a lot. Not just he and I, but a couple of my coworkers that I used to work with at the Pastoral Institute. Let me give you a story. One time I got ready to present a servant leadership, my servant leadership workshop to an organization here in the community. And when I arrived, 3 weeks out, I was on the phone with the coordinator. He goes, "Now, you're not going to talk about God, are you?" I said, "No, we don't approach it like that. But it is servant leadership." So about 2 weeks out, I go to his organization to take a look at the training room, see what we were going to be presenting, that kind of thing. So he goes, "You're not going to be talking about God, are you?" I said, "I got this. Don't worry about this." So in the morning of the workshop, I'm setting up. And he goes, "Now, you're not going to talk about God." I said, "Listen, he's going to be in the room. If you want to bring him up, I will. We can do that. If not, he's definitely here. Don't worry about that. He's here." And we used to have this conversation because I had one coworker who believed that servant leadership could not thrive in a capitalist society. He just did not believe it could. But when you look at the characteristics or the traits or the qualities of a servant leader, this is focus on the qualities: trustworthiness, self-awareness, humble, caring, visionary, empowering, relational, competent, good steward, community builder. Who wouldn't want their organization to embody those characteristics?
Exactly.
Who wouldn't want their football team or basketball team to embody trustworthiness and empowering and being relational? Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, you're right.
Wouldn't you want it in your spouse as well?
It's a tightrope that we've always walked as believers. You can't, you don't want to lose your freedom. You don't want to lose your podium. You don't want to lose your influence, your platform, but you don't want to also betray your beliefs. So it's a tightrope wire that you walk, and you use wisdom and discretion in the way you approach people. Servant leadership is just so relational. That everything that about leadership is relational. Everything about coaching is relational.
Somewhere in your job description is the word relational.
That's right. But if you, whether you practice servant leaderships in a secular world or in a faith-based environment, it is extremely effective, and it develops people It brings out the best in others. It makes an organization thrive, and it helps a person to fulfill their potential and be empowered.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, it works. And that was what Mr. Turner finally said. Either way, it's a belief system. It's a philosophy of leadership, and it's effective no matter how you practice it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And listen, we all in the world as believers, as Christians, it's we can't go to extremes. We alienate so many people if we get too radical in anything we do. So we just have to live by those characteristics that you just read to us, Kelvin. That's what we do. And that's whether you're a Christian.
And the most important thing is love. Mr. Turney's, the engine of servant leadership is love. If you love me, you're going to embody all of those. You're going to make mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen, but at its foundation is love. That's what it's all about.
I agree with you. And Jesus Christ practiced servant leadership in everything he did. And he was the consummate servant leader. All of those things you read, he practiced, he preached, he lived, he embodied. So my preference is, as a Christian, I want people to know I'm a Christian. I don't want them to think I'm a nut,
Yeah, I agree with you.
And my dad, Kelvin, was a pastor my entire life, and mostly small, more.
So you're a preacher's kid.
Churches. I am a PK. Yes, sir. I am.
Is that true? What they say about you?
Well, we got this way from playing with Deacon's kids. That was my answer with everything. I'm only the way I am because I played with all the Deacon's kids. But I watched my dad. And I didn't maybe realize this until I became an adult later and started really analyzing people around me and people that I coached with, people that I coached under, administrators that I worked under. That being a pastor is a lot like being a coach or being an administrator. You're trying to hold together a congregation of people that are all different, mm-hmm. and you're trying to find the best way to serve each one of those and keep all of these little groups of people happy. Not necessarily happy, but you're trying to keep them satisfied. You're trying to keep them engaged. You're trying to keep them, as the term Marty and I have used several times on this podcast, you're trying to keep them bought in to what you are doing and the direction you're going as a church. And sometimes you had extremely strong personalities in those congregations mm-hmm. that would refuse to buy into what you were doing because it didn't match what they thought you should be mm-hmm. doing. I've seen, I've been in church conferences that were not pleasant, and I've been in others that are just pleasant and easygoing. And the best churches though were somewhere in between those, because mm-hmm. if everything was all easygoing, then usually there was a little bit there's something up here, something's not going right, because there wasn't hardly any conflict. But then you had others where it was all conflict all the time. So somewhere in the middle were the best experiences I believe my dad had as a pastor. And I believe that's the best experience I've had as a coach and working in the administrative side of athletics, as well as any other job I've had. It's been where there's a balance between that conflict and that success and that easiness. But everybody seems to be pulling in the same direction. And it's because there is a leader there who is doing his job. He is serving the people that he has working under him so that they find that niche, they find that groove where they're going to be successful.
Well, believe it or not, I've been asked to come in on several occasions to present emergenetics to churches. And it's been interesting. I've enjoyed it.
I can imagine it would be interesting because I can see the light bulbs going on over people's heads, when they start to realize, oh my goodness, that's why I'm like I am, and that's why he's like. It's not that he's a bad person, and he shouldn't be making me so angry because that's just the way he is, And it's amazing to see those things happen.
Yeah, it is.
I think more churches need to practice servant leadership. Personally, I think more churches need to buy in.
Mm-hmm.
Kelvin, I got a question I want to ask you, man.
Go for it.
What about Gen Z and servant leadership? What's your take on that?
You mean the generation that's coming through now?
Yeah, the Gen Z book.
Here's what I try not to do. I try not to put a blanket statement on a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because let me give you an example. You can watch the news and you can hear things said about Gen Z that, they don't want to work, they want to come in late, they want to take these numerous mental health days. But then when I get an opportunity to go to a college or university and I work with some of these young people, I'm thinking, I think we're in great hands. I've always felt that when I work with young people. I walk away and I'm thinking, I think we're going to be just fine.
Kelvin, I agree with you on that. I teach Gen Z aspiring coaches, sports management. Largely what I teach is guys and girls who want to be involved in sports,
Yeah.
I am greatly encouraged at what I see with Gen Z kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the same things. I don't see that in practice at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have one student that I teach that fits that description. I am extremely encouraged. I think you're right. We're in good hands.
Mm-hmm. And if there is a problem with them, it's our fault.
That is true.
That's true.
That is true.
Most of them do not form their way of doing things, their approach to things on their own. They've had examples that they've been looking at. Just like you talk about the power of observing. I like you say, I like to sit back and observe people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I believe God gifted me with the ability to discern things sometimes about people, and pick up on little things here and there, and I always catch myself doing that, and a lot of people would hear me, if they heard what I was thinking, they would say, well, you're being judgmental. You're not supposed to be judgmental. You're not supposed to be judging those people. It's not that I'm judging those people.
Yeah.
I am in my mind. I'm circling around. Okay, something's happened to them at some point in their life, and they have a trust issue, or they've been hurt really bad, and they're guarded, and or they have been bottled up their whole life, and now they're trying to get out. And it's I see that happening all the time, and I think it's important to realize that we've got to be the right example to people, and I think that's one of the biggest deals with a coach is right now in the background over here, Tennessee and Arkansas are playing baseball, and I've seen several articles over the past couple of weeks about different coaches in the NCAA, especially in baseball, and how volatile they are. And the announcers today, when this game came on, were talking about how passionate, using my air quotes, about how passionate a particular coach is and his players. There's a whole lot of difference between passion and just downright raw abrasiveness. I think. And some coaches that you encounter are just abrasive, and they are looking for that scab to pick off, and they are looking for that wound to open up, and so they can jump on it and pounce, and it bleeds over to your players. Your players are going to act. A lot of times, your players are going to reflect how their coach acts.
Yeah, a team will take on the personality of its coach. Yeah, exactly. in more ways than one. I agree with you. Same with an organization. Yeah.
I use that every day in my job. I'm a marketing representative for a company, and I go around and I talk to people, and we're franchise owned. And I often use the example when I'm talking to people about our business and why I believe that it's my job to make them believe that our business, would be the best one for them to use if they have the opportunity. And I say, look, we're a franchise-owned business. And I said, all of us are not alike. We drive the same kind of vehicles. You recognize our logo. You see the TV commercials because we're nationwide. But all of us are not alike. I said, let's take, for example, I said, we're the same way as a fast food restaurant. Let's take McDonald's. You go to McDonald's in one town, and it may be the nicest, cleanest, most friendly, great customer service McDonald's that you've ever been in your life, and you're just impressed by it. And you might go 5, 10 miles down the road and stop in another town
Totally
and
different.
go into McDonald's, and it is completely the opposite. It's 180
Yeah.
degrees the other way. It's dirty. It stinks in there. The staff don't care whether you're there or not. They don't welcome you when you come in the door. You go in the bathroom's nasty, and you're like, what is the difference between these two? It's the same company. It's the same parent company that owns this. What's the difference? It goes back to the leadership.
Mhm.
Who's leading that company? And they are only, those employees and those people in those restaurants are only following the leader. They're playing follow the leader.
Yeah.
And they're doing what they've been told is important and not important. They're not placing importance on things that have not been laid out there to be important. And that's the difference. And I think that's, that's what I tell people. I work for a company that's owned by a guy who really cares about what we're doing. And I said every day he mentions that. We have big signs that when you walk out the door that say do the right thing, and he preaches that, and that's why we have a good reputation in our company. And
It matters.
and it does. It matters. And it's same thing happens on a football team. The same thing happens in a church. The same thing happens in any kind of organization. That group is going to reflect how they're being led. And sometimes they get led so far down a path, it's really hard to turn them around when a new leader comes in, if that old leader has taken them down the wrong direction. Do you see that as well?
Well, let me just say this. If the leader has taken them in the right direction, that's why in athletics, I don't get my temperature up when a first-year coach comes in and doesn't have success. Those are not his kids. Those are his step kids. He's got to come in. He did not recruit them since seventh, eighth grade.
Well
He's
said.
got to come in and establish a whole new relationship. And that's why, when Harsin was at Auburn and DeBoer's at Alabama and I mean didn't Kirby go 7-6 his first year at Georgia? I don't get in. Give them a break. They got to come in and establish their own culture. In the real world, outside of athletics, it takes anywhere from 2 to 7 years to change the culture.
That's right.
But we want it now. We want a national championship today. We want a state championship right now. It doesn't happen that fast.
In the last 18 to 24 hours, Kelvin, since Auburn baseball lost yesterday and didn't get to go to the College World Series, I probably have read no less than 5 posts criticizing Butch Thompson because of decision making. And I'm going, what are you doing? This guy's one of the best in the country and brought a team with a whole bunch of freshmen playing to the threshold of going to the pinnacle of college baseball. And because they lost in the regional to a team that has won 53 games and 23 in a row now, you're going to criticize the coach. It was the coach's fault. Should have made better decisions. Should have handled the pitching different.
Yeah.
It just amazes me how people, think they've got to jump on that keyboard and say things, and it's crazy.
My father would always say, Kelvin, fan is short for fanatic. That's what he would always say. He said that almost weekly.
He's right.
I don't understand that. The goal is to compete for a national championship. It's hard to win a championship. I think most people, you could just snap your fingers and you're going to win it. It is extremely hard to win a championship at any level, at anything.
And only one team emerges.
Only one team.
Yeah. So that's small number. Kelvin, let's close out on something here. I wanted you to talk about, explain to us, how does a person as a leader improve their self-awareness, and how? Tell us something about that.
It requires a great deal of reflection. I also believe, I'm a leadership coach, but if I'm talking to a client and their emotions start to rear its head, I was trained that's when you need a therapist. I ask what questions. I don't ask why questions. But if their emotions get involved, I say, well, maybe you should go see a therapist for this. There's so many ways. There's a standpoint from reflection is extremely important. You can keep a journal, a diary, these kinds of things. Reading is extremely important. Learning is extremely important. And observation to me is extremely important. this book over here, Stand Tall, Mr. Bill Turner wrote the foreword to the book. And he said something in that book that just totally took me by surprise. Nobody had ever said that. He said, Kelvin is a great observer of people. I'm not saying this to blow smoke. I'm not saying this to make myself look good, but it does come down, a lot of it is observation, watching and studying people who you think are on that journey towards self-awareness. There's nothing new under the sun. The Bible tells us that. Okay. I firmly believe that, you know, if you really want to become a very good leader on the journey towards self-awareness, just read the book of Proverbs. Everything is in there. Wow. It tells you what time to get up in the morning, what time to go to bed, how hard you got to work, how to treat other people, all of those things, the importance of wisdom and learning. That's it. Everything else, all these other books, the only thing that's different are stories. It's probably rooted in some form of the book of Proverbs, but I stand by it. That's my favorite book in the Bible. I've actually written a book on it. I haven't published it. And that's the best I can tell you right there. I wholeheartedly believe that. And I try to read the book of Proverbs in full every year and a half, at least.
And it's 31
I want to read that book when it comes out.
Yeah. 31 chapters, 31 days in a month. Read one a
there you go.
day and you got it.
That's it.
Pick 1 month and make it a Proverbs month.
But I do want to put a plug in though. One thing. I have rebranded my website, my YouTube channel. And I'm going to be doing these weekly YouTube videos beginning on June 24th, because the anniversary of Kelvin Red LLC is June 22nd. But that's on a Sunday, so I'm going to start on a Tuesday. But it's called Inside the System. Now, it's not an attack on leaders, but it is a format that I'm taking to help people maneuver through systems and organizations that they work through. I'm looking at a lot of different topics that I'm going to be working. One topic that never gets discussed, I don't think, until I bring it up in my workshops, particularly when I'm working just with leaders. And I always ask the question, can you trust your number two? I think that's extremely important, because when you are a leader, you're a school superintendent, a football coach, a pastor, you know, a lot of your job is outside of the organization. Mm-hmm. So when you leave, it's incumbent that your second in command is speaking the same mission and vision that you speak when you're there. And so I think that is extremely important. And I just want to, and those are some of the things I'm going to be talking about.
Well, we want to have you back again sometime, Kelvin. And, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and the question I would ask is, you know, most coaches in our profession are assistant coaches. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, you have one head coach, and some people have a staff of 12. You know, yeah. And so how does that assistant coach assimilate the culture and pass it forward and live it and breathe it? And how does that coach, when they get out on their own, what do they take with them? You know, what do they embody?
If you have the privilege, let's say you're a Kirby Smart and you get a privilege to work for a Nick Saban. If you have the privilege to work for a very good head football coach in high school, let's just take high school. Don't be in such a rush to leave. Stay and learn as much as you possibly can. We live in a society, I want to go off on my own. I got to have it right now. Stay and learn. Learn as much as you can. What time does the coach turn the lights on in the morning time? What time does he turn them off? And why does the coach say they've got to have their shirts tucked in, all those little things? Stay and learn. Mm-hmm. Education is never ending. And when your opportunity comes, trust me, somebody will pluck you up. They will. But you see so many coaches, they want it now. They want to do something to attain that role right now. Stay and learn. Learn as much as you take notes. Go home and look over what did coach say today, because it must be winning. It must be working. We're winning. You know, that kind of thing. You know, I've often asked, wondered, you had somebody like Bobby Howard, who coached at Columbus High School. He coached at Central. He coached at Pacelli. If I worked at one of those schools, I'd say, hey, coach, can I come sit and have lunch with you this Friday? This Thursday, I want to pick your brain. Even if I'm the assistant principal, I want to pick your brain, that kind of thing.
You're right, Kelvin. Everything I know about basketball, I learned from somebody else.
Yeah.
And by asking those questions, that's the way you learn, is you look at successful people And not everything, because you're different. You can't become someone else.
Yeah.
But there's certain indelible principles in coaching that these guys master. And those are the things you need to pick up and build your own style, build your own way of coaching, but based on principles. So
success leaves clues.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Hey, great quote. I'm going to write that one down. Success leaves clues. It was great having you today, Kelvin.
Thank you.
Outstanding having you. We so appreciate you joining us, Kelvin, and I echo what Marty said. We want to have you back sometime down the line and talk some more because this has been great. It's been great to, number one, see you again, because I don't get to see you as often anymore. But it's been great to see you again, but also great to talk to you and excited about what you've got coming down the pipe. And tell us again how people can get more of Kelvin Redd if they want to.
Well, you can go to my website, kelvinredd.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. Those are some ways you can find me. You can go to my YouTube channel as well, Kelvin Redd.
Kelvin Redd. Hey,
and it's R-E-D-D, Kelvin
Redd. Anybody watching us out there, it will be worth your time to go look up Kelvin Redd and see what he's been doing and the efforts that he's put in. And Kelvin, we so appreciate it. It's awesome to have you. It's awesome to see you, and look forward to talking to you more down the line. And we just appreciate you joining us here on Stand Up, Make a Difference, because you have for a long time been standing up and making a difference.
Yes, you've been stepping up forever.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you next week. And I'll go ahead and give you a tip. Next week, we will have a Division I college head football coach on that's from this Chattahoochee Valley area. Coach Dale McGee at Georgia State University will be joining us next week on the Step Up, Make a Difference podcast. So mark your calendars for next week when that one comes out, and we'll have a good time with Coach McGee. And, of course, Kelvin, you know Dale from the Auburn days and all of his success.
And the Kendrick High School days, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And we're looking forward to talking to Dale next week. And again, thank you for joining us. And everybody have a great week, and we will see you next week on Step Up, Make a Difference.
Thank you so much.